What's going on, everyone? So it's been a few weeks in Legends of the Force, and we finally get to talk about the meta and get a reasonable idea of where things are at now that we've had some data behind us. Of course, we had some major tournaments like the Galactic Championship, Gen Con happened, but as you can see behind me, we're on the Star Wars Limited Competitive Hub, which includes only events from major tournaments that are only over 32 players. So we have 15 events to base that off of, and there's also some other ones that I wanted to talk about a little bit, but we get to see how it's shaped up with a brand new set added. And honestly, it's kind of crazy. It's really crazy in terms of where we're at. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's been watching the channel and supporting the channel. It has been absolutely amazing. Legends of the Force is definitely probably my favorite time of the game. Super heavily biased towards me being able to attend a lot of physical tournaments and being able to interact with all of you. So a big thank you to everyone, and of course my patrons. But we get to dive in firsthand, diving into the winners. So of these 15 tournaments, you can see only 2 of the decks here have actually won 2 different tournaments, and that's actually Boba 4 Data Vault and Quinlan Tarkentown. Now, I don't think this means that Boba 4 or Quinlan are like the number 1 deck in the format or anything at the current moment. As I said, we have more data, but it's not a ton of data to go off of, at least in terms of the actual major tournaments with have reasonable amount of players in that data that's, you know, more or less more competitive and reasonable to include. If you start diving into the actual tournament results, you'll see that there's all sorts of decks that are winning consistently, and that's kind of the takeaway here. There isn't like a clear cut, oh my gosh, this deck is dominated. And take, for example, Sabine Tarkentown being one of the decks that has actually taken down a tournament. And yet, if you look at the top bases, which we'll take a look at in a moment, well, it's Sabine ECL, which is by far the most dominant version of Sabine. And yet it has equivalent amount of wins to Sabine ECL right now. And this is where I say, when we see, you know, a couple more months of tournaments take place, I'm sure we'll see a few leaders start to take a cut above the rest in terms of wins. But realistically, if you look here, there are a lot of options. And if we just diagnose kind of what archetypes people are playing, we've got a space sort of mid-range value deck where you're ramping a little bit. Super Laser Technician Resupply is commonly played. You've got a space strategy, indirect damage, obviously kind of crushing people's units as well as their base and putting a lot of pressure on. Quinlan, tempo, aggro, Tarkentown, disrupting your early game plan. Vader yellow, go wide, kind of end the game when Vader deploys. Sabine ECL, definitely more on the aggro side of things. You've got Gar-Saxon ECL, which is more of a mid-range strategy, oftentimes using Gar-Saxon or a Gideon or Darth Vader as ECL targets. Kylo Tarkentown, much more of an aggro but combo finish, probably the closest we've had to a combo deck. Double Red Sabine, very much an aggro, but with a little bit more, you know, interaction in the early game. Kazuda, super hard aggro deck. Han Blue, more mid-range force / a little bit controlling. Iden Green, full-on control. Kylo Green, that's more of a control deck as well. I mean, there are just so many different archetypes that are actually winning right now, which is kind of surprising to me. And something that maybe FFG wants to change. I'm not sure what their opinion would be about a meta like this. Of course, we've heard the saying many, many times, and we talked about this many, many times, but the biggest thing with FFG is they don't want these super hyper aggro decks, and they don't want these hard control decks. And the reason they don't want that is because it is just not a fun gameplay experience, typically. And that's not necessarily, oh, you know, the competitive experience is horrible, because, well, the people who are playing the competitive games oftentimes aren't basing their judgments on, you know, whether or not a deck is super fun to play against. It's more of, hey, from a casual viewer's perspective and from these events that are, you know, maybe not at the highest level of competitiveness, but at the, you know, mid-tier, not casual, but a little bit higher than that. That's kind of the audience that is more common and that they're really basing it around. Of course, if a leader is just absolutely dominating, then they'll bounce around the competitive scene. But if you look here, I mean, some of these tournaments, yes, certainly are hyper competitive, like the Galactic Championship. But even like day one Galactic Championship isn't something that, you know, a lot of people brought decks to just have fun. There are players that aren't quite casual because they're attending these events and playing in these tournaments, but they're not quite hyper competitive. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. And if you start to dive into the leader and base in the top 8s, this is where I think we get a better description of where everything is at. Because you could include the leader in top, so the top 8, just the leader itself, but this is going to start to include some kind of one-ofs, right? For example, the Sabine leader in the tops. Well, we're going to see Sabine Yellow, Sabine Tarkentown, which has happened. I think there's even a Sabine Data Vault, Sabine Tarkentown here, and there's the Sabine, where's the, I just missed it, Sabine Yellow right here. So yeah, there's definitely sort of like one-ofs or decks that are not considered nearly as strong as what their best counterpart is that are included in this. But if you look at the leader and base, what we have here is a very good shakeup of the meta. The highest, most winning percentage decks of the most, I guess you could say, competitive / best sample size tournaments are Quinlan Voss, Tarkentown, and Han Blue Force, followed up by Sabine ECL, and then Kylo Tarkentown. Now, I do think Kylo Tarkentown is very interesting because Kylo Tarkentown is one of those decks that really, really got pushed forward by the Galactic Championship. And so a lot of the top 8s, or rather a lot of the numbers that are coming from Kylo Ren Tarkentown, the top 8s of this aren't specifically from the Galactic Championship, although there are some of them that did top 8 in the Galactic Championship. But a lot of the numbers here are a little bit more skewed because it was a newer deck at the beginning of the meta, and people weren't really sure how to deal with it. Now, Han Blue Force, yes, that was a newer deck as well in terms of a lot of the deck comes from set 5, but it wasn't something that the strategy was completely different, or that you had to be aware of all these things and be scared of the combo finish and all this different kind of nonsense that Kylo Ren Tarkentown can create. So I think this one is probably the most intriguing one to me just because of how unique it is as a deck compared to everything else. It is sort of like an aggro deck, but it has a lot of interaction in the early game. And then again, you have this combo-esque finish for the deck where you just get in for, 20, 30 damage in a single swing, and sometimes or 2 swings with Modi. Then you also have things like Iden Green, which has definitely had a resurgence. This is probably the premier control deck in terms of the stats, at least. In terms of what people's opinions are, whether Kylo Data Vault is actually better, I don't know. We'll have to see as to what that will shape up at the end of Legends of the Force. But in terms of right now, the data is showing that Iden Data Vault is actually the premier control deck. And Iden Data Vault is a full-on control deck. This is definitely more on that side of things. It's not quite like Kira Data Vault. I know a lot of people were irritated with Kira Data Vault. That's much more of like, it has a lot of interaction in the early game. It has units to play, things like Hylobon Enforcer, Devastating Gunship. You had, Long Pikes deploying. You had things to put out in the early game because Kira also deployed early. Iden's just healing and waiting for the late game. Same with Kylo Ren Data Vault. So we definitely even have like more controlling lists than we did in the previous sets in the top portions of the meta. Boba 4 up here, Garsax and ECL up here, Talzin Red, which I've never really been a big fan of, not quite in the top echelon, still in the top 10 up there with the Kylo Data Vault, but even with such a massive showing in the earlier sections of the meta, well, not quite getting as many top 8s as I would have expected. To be honest, it was actually performed a little bit worse than even I thought, and I didn't think Talzin Red was all that great. But yeah, Iden Green, Boba 4, very big surprises. Kylo Red, very big breakout. But the nice thing about this is that, yes, all these things are considerations, and there's different archetypes here, and who knows what FFG is going to do. But the meta split is incredibly good. Like, it's even better than set 4. I mean, if I were to bring back set 4 post-suspension and take a look here, and we look at the top 8, yeah, Kira, by far, well, I should say by far, but really it's only a matter of a few percentage points. But yes, it was by far the most played, most winning deck of the set. And you can see even in the winning and the actual wins of the tournament, you even had like Ray Data Vault competing, which was kind of really cool. But in terms of leader base in the top 8, which again, I think is a better description of kind of what the meta looks like, we have Kira Data Vault, Sabine, Quinlan. And these are all very much spread out, right? Like this is a pretty good meta. And arguably, with Legends of the Force, this is even better, a better spread because of how very close the wins are. And heck, it actually just got updated, so that's actually pretty awesome. As I was recording this video, look at that, the numbers just got updated with the top 8 finishes, and look at that, we have another Boba 4 and another Quinlan win alongside a bunch more. So it looks like they're just updating it as I'm recording. That was actually pretty cool. Yeah, leader and base in the top 8. Well, Quinlan, Han Blue Force, Sabine ECL, Cad Bane Red, Iden Green, Kylo Tarkatown, Boba 4. These are all things that, you know, we had on our radar. Some of them very much expected, like Han Blue, Quinlan Red, Sabine Green, and then like Iden Green making a resurgence was a little bit surprising. And that's just because of how the meta has shaped up, where there isn't need for as much, you know, early game interaction, and the fact that force throw is still quite prevalent. Like if you look at these decks, Quinlan Red is a force throw user, Han Blue is a force throw user, Kylo Red is a force throw user, Towson Red is a force throw user. So of these decks, let's say 1, 2, how many, what is the top 10 here? So of the top 10, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of the decks using force throw. So is it as crazy as potentially a lot of us thought? But those types of decks push things like Kira out, because now force throw is a 1 resource, very common way to kill off Kira, preventing you from overwhelming barrage turns, which is kind of what the thing was, you know, that deck was trying to do to keep parity with the board. And so even if you do have like a more controlling start up against the aggressive decks, you can't bring it back with Kira overwhelming barrage anymore. And then you see Iden Green just full on, I'm running Data Vault, I'm getting the healing from Iden's, you know, action, and I'm just going full on controlling the board rather than trying to play this strategy of getting down an earlier to deploy leader to interact with my units. And that can be a very big shift, and that's what we're seeing. But I have nothing really negative to say. I mean, even when you start diving past the top 10 and you dive into like the top 20, you start to see some really weird ones that is really cool and very, very awesome to see new leaders introduced. Things like Han 4. This was not something that anyone was playing really a whole lot in the previous sets. We have things like, well, Poe Dameron ECL. That's pretty awesome to see. We have things like, and when you get real deep, random one-ofs. Kazuda's all over the place with their one-ofs, like Security Complex, Data Vault, Red and Thermal Oscillator. I mean, you have some really, really fun ones. And of course, this was pretty consistent across the board, right? It was across the board in terms of what people were playing in the previous sets. You always had these like few decks that just brought in 1 or 2 or 3 wins with whatever random strategy they're playing, like Kit Fisto, Force Green, right? That's definitely something that people were doing. But the key with it is we're having a good spread of archetypes. We're also having a good spread of leaders. And we're not having one deck or a couple decks completely dominate. And to be honest, Set Force meta was amazing as well. But this is arguably even a better state. And on top of that, we see such a big amount of Set 5 cards being played. Things like Han Blue. Huge, huge shift. But then you also have decks like Quinlan Red, which only have a couple cards added. So you still have, well, decks that are completely showing up for Set 5, and then decks that are still based on previous strategies with a couple new additions. It is a healthy meta. Very healthy meta. And what's surprising about it is, well, I think they really nailed it. And I don't really think that anything should be really considered for bannings, with the one exception being Force Throw. And I'm not saying that you should ban it. There are a couple videos where I was joking, like, ban Force Throw. But the only reason I say Force Throw is still on the chopping block is because it is a card that is not fun to play against oftentimes. And it's not about, you know, attacking your hand, especially these days, because you have things like, you know, Kiadi Mundi or various ways to just draw extra cards in your decks. It's, you know, the hands that go, you know, play a unit, force throw my own card, kill your unit for 1 resource, and play another thing, that people are still a little bit irritated with. In terms of a competitive sense and what the actual meta shows, force throw wouldn't necessarily be something that I'd be on the lookout to ban. But this comes down to a more casual slash, that semi-casual, slightly more competitive players that are looking for the fun of the game and still upset with Force Throw. And the same thing happened with DJ, by the way. Han Yellow was absolutely a deck that was really good in the meta. No doubt about it. Like, no doubt about it. But what happened with that deck is the things like DJ really made some of the matches just completely unfun. And that's exactly what kind of Force Throw does in some of the matches, matchups, I should say. And of course, DJ was an extreme example. Of course, it got banned. That's why it's an extreme example, because it was attacking opponents' resources. And while Force Throw could deal with your board for one resource, taking an opponent's resource is a big no-no. And honestly, FFG probably should have known that beforehand. Regardless of anything else, of it being strong or weak or whatever, the fact that you're able to take a resource period is like, whoa, come on now. Now we're entering into a realm that no one wants to engage in, right? So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What do you think about Legends of the Force? I know I just made a video the other day about the set tier list. I felt pretty good about Legends of the Force, and I know people are saying recency bias. Not really for me. Like I said, I've played the game a long time, and I can remember each section of what the meta was like and each section of what the power level of cards are these days. And I think a lot of people are feeling the same way, which is right now, I mean, Legends of the Force, the cards are very powerful, right? And they are just completely shaping the meta in a way where so many things are viable, and we're seeing that in the stats so far. So, I mean, great job. Legends of the Force, one of the best sets in the game, in my opinion. I know a lot of people agree with me, and I know a lot of people think Legends of the Force is the best set in Star Wars Unlimited, but my heart is still held out for Spark of Rebellion. So let me know what you think about the meta, what you're playing, and what you expect to be the top deck. I mean, like I said, while Bubble 4 is winning, it's got the most wins alongside Quinlan Red. We'll see if it truly is one of the best decks as we get more data in weeks coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.